Right, so Tony Blair, a man whose name will be remembered more for the Iraq War than anything else, whose name has become synonymous with going to war on false pretenses and making a fortune out of it, getting away with it all, and continuing to cash in ever since, with the latest example being his continued involvement with a regime following a state-sponsored murder, still on the take from them as he apparently is. The man amassed a personal fortune off the back of the Iraq War, some £100 million, according to former South African politician turned author Andrew Feinstein, a man who knows a thing or two about such things. And though there's little argument Saddam Hussein was a dictator, let's not pretend the war against him was over anything other than oil and a US president's wet dream to finish what his daddy had started, making Bush no less of a danger to the world than other world leaders at the time. The only difference is who our media chose to portray as said leaders as war heroes, or which ones they chose to portray as Bond villains in effect, and Blair has always benefited from that kind of media protection. He got rich and got away with it all. No wonder he wears the creepiest, most unearned Richter's grin going. Hussein aside, though, Blair does love dictators. He made the most of the opportunity to cozy up to them when he perversely got made Middle East peace envoy after he stepped down as Prime Minister in 2007. And in 2009, he set up Tony Blair Associates, effectively an opportunity to cash in on his new role, as it was. He'd started coveting special relationships as while he was Prime Minister, and one example would be Colonel Gaddafi was referred to as Dear Muammar, having colluded with that regime to deport informants and their families back to Tripoli in 2007. He was also well known for his cozying up to Vladimir Putin too, having once given him some silver cufflinks for his birthday. Absolute besties, clearly. Once Tony Blair Associates was set up, though, he was a way to cash in, though, and through the TBA has charged millions. He's happily advised Kazakhstan dictator Nursultan Nazarbayev, who wanted strategic advice from him after his security forces gunned down 14 protesters who were after a pay rise. That's a familiar story, but we don't go to such extremes here. Tony Blair was still happy to advise him. He was told he'd have blood on his hands if he didn't stop advising the country, as it was, Blair was, the blatant conflict of interest as the Middle East peace envoy. But with all the blood he had on him after Iraq, I doubt he'd notice if he was literally drowning in it. The TBA had advised the Kuwaiti government too, perhaps an obvious target. They were on the receiving end of Iraqi aggression under Saddam Hussein, as we remember, but they themselves were ostracizing stateless Arabs called Badoon, and still are to this day. Blair involved himself in Azerbaijan as well, a country marred with political irregularities and who has had the same president for more than 20 years as a result. While still mates with Putin, BP wanted a deal to get natural gas from Azerbaijan to Europe to subvert Russia, and so they asked Blair to step in for them. Blair shut down Tony Blair Associates in 2016 when the heat apparently got a bit too much. It was apparently to focus on charity work, he said. But of course, that merely brings us on to the Tony Blair Institute and closer to the story doing the rounds at the moment. Now, the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change conveniently started up just after Tony Blair Associates wrapped up in 2016 as well. To a cynic like me, it very much just appears that after Kazakhstan, after Azerbaijan, after taking a business advisory role with the Egyptian government whilst working as peace envoy in the Middle East still as well, Blair decided he needed to start all over and fold up his old firm with all the reputational damage that had been done to that and start a new one, fresh slate. His hands still dripping with blood as they will be until he finally has his day in The Hague, if that day ever comes. He annoyingly does keep falling on his feet, so fresh was perhaps the wrong word, but still, the Tony Blair Institute was born. His name's still front and centre, still trading on it, not really believing it holds him back in any way, shape or form. I can only speculate at the ego of the man, frankly, still opining on today's politics as he does, despite being about as welcome as a dose of the clap while someone stamps drawing pins into the afflicted area at the same time. He just doesn't seem to see it, and the media are just as bad stroking his ego by asking him onto their shows. But I digress. The Tony Blair Institute pretty much just picked up where the TBA left off, and in 2017 they signed a £9 million advisory deal with Saudi Arabia, the head-chopping oil-rich dictatorship. So here we go again, and here we come to the issue now being aimed at Blair. Just the latest in a string of advice, 2 dictator scandals he's forever been able to just brush off, and he probably will this one as well. The following year, the deal was signed between the Tony Blair Institute and Saudi Arabia. The Saudi prince, Mohammed bin Salman, authorised the assassination of a Saudi journalist, of course. It made the news quite prominently. We probably all remember it, the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, who was lured to the Saudi embassy in Istanbul murdered and dismembered with a bone saw, allegedly, in order to dispose of the evidence. The following month, the CIA concluded it was bin Salman who ordered the assassination directly. Now, you might think this would be a bit awkward for Blair and his institute a year into their little deal with them, but Blair, in a statement, apparently said he took the view then, and remains strongly of the view now, that staying engaged there is justified, despite the terrible crime in question. He based his view on the immense and positive importance of the Crown Prince's reforms and the country's strategic importance to the West. In other words, money spoke to him more loudly than murder did. So should it be any surprise, news has come out in 2023 that Blair's institutes continued to cash in on links to the Saudi regime ever since. Well, he would, wouldn't he? He's never been held accountable for his conduct as Prime Minister or peace envoy. He has made himself extremely rich, and you can't escape the knowledge that he has done so on the bloodshed and misery of millions. He is brazen, craven, and greedy beyond all compare, completely amoral in his pursuit of wealth. Again, we are reminded that Tony Blair is somebody nobody in their right minds should want to be associated with, should run a mile from anyone being advised by and advocated for by him. And so we come full circle to such a man who not only embraces Blair, but refers to himself as Blair on steroids. If you think Keir Starmer isn't looking at a future for himself with the same pound signs in his eyes Blair was, you're very much mistaken. Yet, of course, Starmer is the great human rights barrister, isn't he? Making it all the more warped on the face of it that he should want anything to do with Blair and the human rights atrocities he's been associated with. Yet he does. Yet he invokes his name. So if you think Starmer has any more the morals of an alley cat than Blair does, you're in for a rude shock if he ever reaches power. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share, and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Leave a comment and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation for you where Starmer sat down for a cosy chat with his idol Blair recently, an insight into what a Starmer-led administration might look like, perhaps. And I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.